Welcome to the FPV war. And in preparation for this conversation, I opened X today and immediately saw footage of 3 Russian military spotted and hit by small explosive dropped from drones. I paused for a minute to feel what it did to me. What did I feel? Horror? Or perhaps satisfaction, to be honest, because I see Russia's invasion as a brutal violation of human rights. Very tough questions to ask yourself. Can we even... come in. Can we ever truly judge what we feel when watching something like this? There's so much very complex emotions. And I've seen other drone footage, bodies torn apart, soldiers begging for mercy, and I can never unsee it. War is no longer distant. It's close, personal, algorithmically served in first-person view. We don't just see war, we experience it, shaped by platforms that decide what's visible and what's not. War has become content, so to speak. And that raises urgent questions, especially here at the University of Technology, where drone technologies are developed. We must ask what responsibility comes with creating tools that don't just fight wars, but frame them also. Welcome, welcome. So let me start with asking a few questions to all of you. Have you ever felt conflicted while watching real war footage online? I see people. Would somebody care to join or to speak out? And yes, you would? Or the microphone is there? Yeah? Okay, good. Yeah, no microphone needed.
Okay, well, it makes you wonder, should this even be online? Should this be like shown off the way it does? Like currently you see a lot of videos of hacks and all this kind of stuff. You wonder, should this even be like publicized or almost advertised?
Yeah.
It makes you feel a bit weird about it.
Oh, well, let's see. Who would say here in this room that war footage shouldn't be shown on social media, for instance? See a few hands. And who would say, of course, it's social media, it's free. You should share it. 1 and 2 and 3 hands. Okay. Okay. There was another hand when I asked the question who felt a bit conflicted watching war footage. Would you care to share your thoughts?
Yeah, I think it's a little conflicting for me because it sort of shows up on these feeds where it's like 15-second clips, so you'll see footage of war and then the next footage will be of a cute cat or something.
Yeah.
And so it's how this algorithm sort of wants to capture your attention by feeding you different emotional inputs, I guess.
Yeah.
So it's conflicting because I think that it's good that we get to engage with what's actually going on in the real world away from our privilege, but also the way it's constructed isn't really ethically right, according to me.
Okay, thank you for sharing. Perhaps another question. Would you feel differently about a drone strike if the footage included the victim's face, or perhaps her or his would that be something different there?
I feel like that would be more humanizing, which would make it more traumatic for the viewer, maybe, but also like doesn't dehumanize the victims in war as much.
Okay, well, thank you for sharing.
Yeah.
Other opinions here?
Make it less normalized as well. Like as if this is a norm, you cannot do anything about it. It's that easy to do it.
It's that easy. Well, that's well put, I would say. Yeah. Okay, well, about all this kind of things we're going to talk today, and we have 2 very eminent speakers, I would say. The first one is Daniel Johnston, a PhD candidate at the Digital Ethics Center of Delft at Delft University of Technology, especially military ethics. Welcome, Nick. Please come here and sit. And Ike Bouke-Eijsma, assistant professor at Delft University of Technology. He conducts research on understanding and quantifying human-robot interactions. And additionally, he has a strong interest in existential philosophy. From this perspective, he frequently reflects on the impact of modern technology on our humanity. Please come forward. And I would like to ask Nick if you would start your presentation.
All right, so my name's Daniel Johnston. I've already been introduced, so I'll just jump right into it. So I just want to start with a brief sort of content comment. There won't be graphic images. We're not going to see any blood, but we're going to be talking about the people or contexts within which people consume that media. So the content is still reflective about combat footage, war footage, violence. And so the content, at least spoken, described, and related here is difficult, but that's sort of the whole point. So it starts out already with an immediately sort of difficult, funny, but darkly tragic conversation. I have a friend, he's a drone operator in Ukraine. I sent him just a kind of message to check up on him, "Are you winning, son?" And he sent back, "You should see our new snuff films." Joking, he didn't intend to send it to me. The notion that he's creating footage of people dying because he's a drone operator and he drops bombs on people. That's his job. He's doing it probably right now on the front. And I thought about snuff. Maybe you've heard about it, this urban legend, particularly in America, that there was a market for footage of people being tortured, raped, and killed, and being sold, and that profit was the prime motive of its creation. As a consequence of that conversation, I decided to title my talk "War and Snuff: The Techniques and Audiences of Violence," to reflect on not only what happens to us when we consume this footage, but how our audience how being an audience shapes how violence is done. So my conversation, 4 brief parts. I want to talk first about how it is that militaries see the world. What are the eyes through which military institutions look at the earth, look at people? What are the technologies that change that? Secondly, how do civilians, not the ones who are caught in the conflict, but those who are kind of far removed, maybe in the imperial core, as they say, how do they experience it? And then, how is the violence performed because there's an audience? And lastly, what are the differences between who is watching what? What are the different audiences and genres of violence? So, some of my formatting got weird, but bear with me. A common story told about the development of the way militaries look at the world is the evolution of what they call the martial gaze, right? The eyes with which militaries look at people and things, how they learn about what's happening on the battlefield. Once upon a time, someone would have to run like marathon to come tell you what happened in a battle. It's all reported, it's embodied, it's bound by the perspective and the trust you have in a person. Later, in early modernity, rationalization introduces linear perspective rules, standardization, principles are applied to represent the world, surveying, cartography starts to grow. In modernity proper, mechanization of perspective with cameras, it's top-down using hot air balloons and later planes to piece together high-fidelity images of the world. And the contemporary ambition is not only to have a mechanized picture of the world, but an autonomous one. Networks of sensors, a sensor infrastructure which can autonomously and networked build a picture of the world in the battlefield. And indeed, much of what we as civilians experience of the world is shaped by military innovations, for better or worse. Cartography's advances shaped by, say, imperial ambitions to sail around the world, cartographies, surveying methodologies driven by military necessity. GPS is a product of the Department of Defense. As one scholar, don't worry too much about the academic stuff, but if you are interested, we can talk. One scholar, Bousquet, says, when the scope of the military's vision of the world gets so complete, it's not only just looking at the enemy, in the end it looks back at the society that produced it, right? This kind of all-encompassing gaze. And this may be insecurity. Sometimes we feel that no matter where you are, you're a potential target. Perhaps less so here than other places in the world, but the notion that its view of the world is all-encompassing. But humans, of course, civilians, experience war differently than militaries. We get different packages of information that come to us. Once upon a time, again, the ancient world, someone had to tell you. Maybe there's a monument or a bard or a messenger. In early modernity, it starts to be standardized through print. Pamphlets and newspapers can be enforced a certain message. Here it's about a battle in Nottingham, and a funny title says, "This is a true and exact relation of the manner in which the Majesty's forces conducted war," right? So it's a standardized method. The telegraph is the first moment in modernity when information travels faster than transportation, and then, as the story is so often told with the camera, it becomes cinema, that war is experienced like film. And a lot of people have said that's a pretty bad thing, and its transformation into entertainment is bad for us. It might not even be possible, according to François Truffaut, a French director, to depict war in an anti-war way. Because you're always safe, you get the thrill without the threat, and maybe that's a problem. The scholarly, particularly in the French sphere, so not only a director, but a bunch of French philosophers say, hey, the trouble with it is not only that there's the thrill without the threat, there's the trouble with the fact that the battlefield becomes sort of a cinema location and it makes the war unreal. A very famous book written by Baudrillard, French theorist, says it's almost as if, for the people of the United States who waged the war, that the Gulf War never even happened, that it became a non-event, that it was mere spectacle, that it becomes unreal. And that's a very common talking point that I want to explore further. But the Gulf War was over 30 years ago. A lot has changed. The ability to mass broadcast of one-to-many dissemination from a state institution has become more of a many-to-many distribution. We have TikTok, we have Instagram, we have all these other methods by which you can cultivate audiences, build aesthetics, send information. So what's happening now? Well, I really liked this comment. There's an Instagram page called Popular Front. They're journalists who cover conflicts. They had footage, this is 72 hours ago, it's very recent, that the first fixed-wing aircraft was taken down by a waterborne drone. The Ukrainian Defense Intelligence took out a Russian fixed-wing plane, which is a big deal. And one of the comments was, so cool, but also man-made horrors beyond my comprehension. Beginning to capture the uncanniness of the casualness of consuming groundbreaking things thousands of miles away within, a day or so of it happening. So shout out to Liam JP11. But there's even rougher and darker communities. This is from a Reddit subreddit with over 1 million followers called Combat Footage. You get headlines like, Russian soldier pulls the pin of his own grenade after getting wounded, GoPro footage captures PKK militant recording his own death, etc. It's almost, even the titles are kind of rough to read. But then you see the comments, right? Can't believe I can watch this type of stuff while taking a shit at work. The future is now, in response. Another comment, I could watch this footage all day, pew pew, right? The entertainment of actual war footage. So one instant and easy and common reflection is purely like, what does it do to us when we consume war footage? And there's a field of research, if you're interested, in psychology called neurocinematics. People are put under MRIs, shown footage, and we try to see what happens when you see that footage. I'm not going to get into that so much, as I want to ask, what is it that our viewership does to violence? The notion that the people pulling triggers out there know that someone can watch what I'm doing. Part of it is that it becomes literal performance. You might have seen on TikTok the IDF dancing on tanks. Again, within the last 48 hours of videos going viral of a gender reveal destruction of a set of homes in Gaza, IDF puts blue powder in the explosion, reenacting one viral mode of communication with another. A small false news disclaimer, this person who's been nicknamed Timothy Chalamet, sort of celebrity status of a figure in Yemen, he's not actually a fighter per se, but achieved celebrity status by virtue of his proximity to conflict. He boarded a vessel that Houthi forces had captured outside of Yemen and became sort of a celebrity. Different units, I mean, pretty much every unit in the Russo-Ukrainian conflict has an Instagram or Telegram page where they post their combat footage and solicit donations. And as Western media likes to say, they're fighting for likes in the TikTok war, which is its own sense, I think, a bit sensational. But there's a bit of an older and I think interesting history that I want to introduce. So, a brief story. On January 7th, 1914, the Mutual Film Company negotiated a contract with the Mexican general Pancho Villa. He was fighting a real revolution against a real government with real guns and real people and real lives on the line. And for $25,000 at the time, a huge amount of money, a film corporation, Mutual, had bought the rights to the revolution. Pancho Villa needed to fund his war. He wanted an audience and sympathy in the United States. Famously, Panchovia would delay his attacks on government forces so that the lighting would be right from the sun to be captured on film. The anticipation of an audience had already changed how the conflict was conducted. And in this case, launching a raid on an emplaced enemy during the daytime already puts you at extra risk. So lives were put on the line to get it good on film. 1914, probably way later, but I think this is a really riveting example. And the monetary incentives, the material incentives, and how it shapes conflict echo today. This is also very recent news. Within the last week, the Ukrainian state launched a project or some combination of the state with a private corporation to reward drone teams for uploading footage of confirmed kills on enemy forces with points that they could spend on a digital marketplace to get other drone equipment. And different targets are granted certain point values, right? If you disable a tank, it's maybe 40 points. If you destroy a tank, it's 80. If you kill 3 infantrymen, it's worth 10. Right? But kind of a translation, you have an algebra of life and death, and the reward is footage. A very, very dark example. Though the unbelievers despise it is the title of a propaganda video that was made by the Islamic State in, I think, 2014 or 15. On the stage of a Roman theater, which was over 2,000 years old, which is itself already kind of darkly auspicious, they conducted and filmed a very elaborate mass execution of 22 members of the Assad government's forces. And open source intelligence review of the footage found that the actual execution, based on just through the different clips that compose the overall spectacle, took at least 6 hours. They had people sitting in the sun, pretending to be a cheering crowd, singing songs, children are involved, there's all sorts of spectacle. But they drag out something that, at a first glance, looks like a kind of orgiastic, volatile moment of entropic bloodshed and desire for death. This was actually a freakishly well-coordinated theatrical spectacle using an editing software that cost at least $200,000. The snuff dimension, so there's a Telegram channel, again, with over 1 million followers, called Archangel Spetsnaza, so Archangel Special Forces. It was a Russian Telegram channel, still in operation. I visited it yesterday, where not only do they share footage and updates about the war, but special members can kind of pay, not kind of pay, they can literally pay to get access to execution videos and torture videos. This is literal snuff. In some cases, violence that might not have happened if not for an audience. Now, often when philosophers talk about this, though, they say, you know, either in the period of the Gulf War, these techniques and these technologies have made the conflict unreal, have taken away the reality. Or maybe they'll say, this footage, this method of delivery, Telegram, TikTok, Instagram, first-person view drones, the intimacy of the technology has ushered in a new era. And when I originally introduced this kind of 4-stage vision of history, here's the technologies that introduce a new era for how militaries see the world. Here's the technologies that shape how civilians experience the conflict. We get this kind of periodization, this notion that we belong to a certain era with a certain dominant mode of experiencing war as civilians separated from the conflict. But I want to make what I think important point that it's not just one genre and it's not just one audience. And I think what's important for us is the difference between how different people, even people in this room, between myself and you and the people you're sitting next to, have very different experiences of these wars. And we don't often talk about it. And I think it's very difficult to talk about. And I think one of the first points is simply that it's really gendered. So let's be really real for a second. On those Telegram channels and Reddit accounts, if we were to get the data demographically, who's subscribed? Who's paying? Who's watching? Susan Sontag wrote a great article. She is an American thinker, essayist and philosopher. And she asked in an essay she wrote called Looking at War, is there an antidote to the perennial seductiveness of war? And is this a question that a woman is more likely to pose than a man? Probably yes. She was echoing an even older conversation. In the 1930s, Virginia Woolf had a pen pal. He wrote her, "Hey, Virginia, how are we going to put an end to war?" And she said, "First, look at the newspaper and tell me what you feel, and I'll tell you what I feel. I don't think we feel the same things when we see the updates from the front." Secondly, no period is ever total. No technique of communication is ever total. There's a really good essay or article that I found, and the title's very cute. It says, "When the News Was Sung, Ballads as News Media in Early Modern Europe." So we talked about how in early modernity, with standardization, newsprint, and the press, that the state could standardize how you find out about the news. But it's not simply that, oh, that was an era in which news was standardized. It was an era in which one method of communication was in conflict and tension with other modes. Namely, the people who are shouting, the town criers in the streets like a Renaissance fair, cannot be nearly as easily censored as the people who control the printing press. And so this article, in a field of research related to it, is all about the difference and the dissonance you experience when one medium communicates, and this is even about people's experience of war, when one medium tells you about some reality and another one tells you about it differently, and they're in tension with one another. How do you handle the fact that the town crier says that there's 10,000 dead in the Crimean War, so a Victorian conflict of note, versus a newspaper which tells you it's 2,000? And I think similarly, we're all tasked with a similar problem of synthesizing what it's like when we hear about all the context of a conflict without the content, namely on television or radio, and then maybe you end up on some weird corner of the internet or a friend shows you, and you get a lot of content without enough context. And I think for a philosopher, at least, that's a classical problem of the particular and the general. This thing, you see a body on your screen, and you're like, this is reality. Until you realize, like, oh, well, what patch is on his arm? What is he doing there? Why? And you start realize, well, to get the reality of that image, which feels really grippingly real, you need a whole wealth of content. So no single medium is adequate. And in fact, in the empirical research about the people who go out of their way to watch combat footage, in fact, there was an essay or an article, titled, "Who Watches ISIS Beheading Videos and Why?" And they found people who would watch them. Why'd you do it? Most people said they actually don't know why, they can't give an account. Whether they're being honest, if it's reporting bias, who knows? But many of them said because they heard about it and it seemed so unreal on the news, they kind of wanted to check. The deficits of one medium of communication, the deficits of one experience, promote a curiosity, almost like clickbait, that drive you to another. So I'll end, because according to my 20-minute timer, I have just 2 minutes, but I won't use it all. Maybe other people have this experience, but I'll just relate it from myself. I've worked with refugee populations, people who've come from conflicts. I was in one place with, for example, a large Kurdish population from, say, Syria and Iraq. Sometimes they would be like, "Hey man, how's it going?" And they would just show you combat footage. People who are like grievously harmed by the realities of that combat and who have fled it and who might have experienced it. And I think in contrast to those who say that the sort of spectacularization of war renders it unreal, there's a lot of people for whom conflict is really, really real who go to that footage. And in that same article about ISIS beheading videos, people who have experienced physical violence in their lives are more likely to seek it out. There's some puzzle here I don't have the full answer for, but I also see it playing out sometimes just on the metro. I take very regularly both the train and metro from Brussels to Delft. I kind of pendle between. And I've started looking around, and sometimes I see people just on their phone, not simply stumbling across combat footage, but clearly wading through it. I don't know exactly how to unpack it, but I don't think I can make sense of my experience of day-to-day life and of the wars and how they affect me and my relationships with other people unless I can make sense of that difference between those who are seeking it out, those who are terrified by it, those who are thrilled by it, and those who are puzzled by it, and how they experience it, whether recreationally or in a more terrified manner. So, yeah, I don't offer a full conclusion or answer, but this is the case I want to make is that there's a lot of difference between genres and audiences, and also that in many cases they're performing for you, whether to scare you or thrill you. That's my presentation.
Thank you, Nick. There's still some room for questions now.
Yeah, okay, I was going to sit back
for you.
I'll sit back down anyways. Okay.
Yeah. Perhaps start with with a question which concerns all of us here. Do you think there's a kind of, you being an ethicist, do you think there's a kind of moral responsibility for us when we're searching on our social media, when it comes down to watching war footage?
Yeah, I think one way it could be framed, and this is only the beginning of a reflection, because I don't have very committed normative stances, so I'll probably be persuaded by the end of this evening. One thing that comes to me is, what do you owe the people who are being brutalized in war? Namely, I think about it, if I was killed in any circumstance, under what circumstances or in what way would I be comfortable with people seeing my death? The idea of it occurring recreationally, or as one guy jokes in his comment while he's taking a shit on the toilet, if we're committed to the principles of dignity that underpin broader kind of conversations about rights and so on, I think the dignity we owe other lives is to treat with some ritual and ceremony their life, their suffering, their death, and to let it have the gravity it has. I'm reminded of a talk that was held here some months ago. We had a speaker talking about Confucianism, and if I remember, he said that one principle in Confucianism in the Analects is it was recommended for people to stay away from slaughterhouses, which seems like a really strange recommendation, but the idea back then was you don't want to, quote unquote, waste your empathy on animals you can't save. Now, I don't know if I agree with that. I think maybe it's quite important to take seriously the suffering of animals and to experience it quite heavily. But this notion of what do you owe yourself in terms of the consumption and the looking at of suffering, I think the research about desensitization is real, and it's a danger of undermining your ability to act. So if one is looking on suffering, I think it's important that it contributes to you being a person who goes out and does something in solidarity with that suffering. If not, the helplessness is very dangerous. I see it in people around me who are news hounds. I really try not to read the news, actually, for the purposes of this, or unless I can do something about it. That's a principle I try to develop in my own life, because also what I think I owe myself and not just the dignity of others.
Okay. Are there any questions at this point?
So I think I question how to stay grounded with reality. So from one side, you really want to educate yourself. You don't want to be ignorant about what's happening in the world. And from the other side, you shouldn't be normalized torture and those kind of suffering in the world.
Yeah.
So where's the trade-off here?
Yeah,
maybe because it's it's not clear to me at least.
Yeah, it's a good and very logical question, I would say.
I think one of the anecdotes that I shared of a Kurdish refugee who showed me combat footage from his homeland, I've had it also with Palestinian refugees who will show me, look, this is my house and it's ruins, right? I think the impulse they have is very human and frankly correct, namely that to look at it alone in isolation is inhuman. No one should have to, speaking of dignity, this is my opinion at least, have to look upon suffering in total isolation. And the isolatedness of this experience is, I think, perhaps more troubling than if you consume the news as a community with others, making sense of it, hopefully not turning into like a Telegram channel like Archangel Special Forces or whatever, but I think turning it into something which is a bit, ritualized so as to grant dignity to those depicted, and then it's tied to a community, maybe a community you can do things with, because for me, even in preparation for this project, if I wasn't able to then talk to you guys about it, because it's horrifying just, without even watching the footage, I wasn't watching footage, I was watching people talking about the footage they watched, and until this moment, I think my well-being was tanked without even seeing it myself. So I think community, ritual, and sharing, I think are critical for kind of grounding and sense-making in general, that it shouldn't be one done alone.
Because sometimes you really want to show the world. I could imagine the Palestinians, for instance, would want to show the world how bloody, bad, and horrific it is. Mm-hmm. So then you have to show some kind of graphic footage there. I would say.
Yeah. I think it's one of these troubled things at least at this brief moment, I don't have a direct answer to, because at one hand, it's like, ah, well, why would you watch it? And at the other hand, well, you sort of have to. I would say the philosophical balance between like the particular and the general context is important. And drawn from another field, if you want to turn someone into a vegetarian for a few weeks, show them slaughterhouse footage. But their likelihood of giving it up is quite high, actually. Same with veganism. So the empirical research about the efficacy of those documentaries which show here's a pig dying, here's a pig dying, here's a pig dying, here's a pig dying, to my understanding is not so strong. I don't know the research about mobilization for political solidarity through war footage, but if I had to hazard a wager, I think some of the same principles might apply, that a kind of political, ethical, philosophical education and formation is needed to contextualize, because the brutal, bloody, like mess of the spectacle of violence isn't evidently sufficient. It always begs context, just as the highly contextualized, virtualized begs for the particular. And so I think it's this dialectic between the two that you have to navigate, ideally with friends, family, community, etc.
More questions at this point, yes.
Yeah, would you say that the people that have experienced war in their homeland or whatever, due to whatever circumstance, would you say they actually get more of the, as you said, sort of particular, they get more of the universal than people in the, let's say, through a digital medium? Mm-hmm. Or would you say that actually perhaps they still actually get quite a particular view of the whole conflict? Because, yeah, I mean, even though they experience it in a more real mode, and they get quite scarred because of it, because of this, right? I would say actually way more than, let's say, you or any of us would even get scarred at just looking at this footage. Would you say that their point of view is still quite particularized, or do they get an even more higher view of the universal?
I think it's quote-unquote privileged vantage point in some ways. Obviously, they'll understand a lot of small things. They might recognize things about the uniform or the material conditions. A broader point I'd make is, so in the research about the viewing habits of veterans of combat war footage, or just media in general, they're not going out of their way necessarily to watch the footage of what it's like in a hospital room. And so even an infantryman who is quote-unquote doing his job is, even while in war, still siloed from so much of what the reality of war is, because the reality of war is also the morgue. The reality of the war is the hospital operating table. And these aren't popular forms of mass consumption. And so the question of what constitutes a fuller grasp of this concept or this phenomenon is not captured, I think, for anyone so far in this sort of sensationalized snuff. And it seems that the only media which proliferates is that which carries this kind of risk that you can vicariously enjoy without the threat. So, even a quote-unquote grizzled veteran who's been to war will get a little bit more, but it's still, I would argue, a siloed experience that still begs and demands for development and playing out, which plenty of people probably do, and certainly do, in communities, whether social, familial, academic, or whatever. But I think it's simultaneously real, but very lacking, I guess.
There's room for more questions later, also for Nick. First, I want to ask Nick Ike. Come here and yeah.
Thank you.
Does it work?
That works, actually.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, thanks. Okay, well, that was an excellent presentation. No, anyway, so I'll keep it a little bit shorter. I'll introduce myself. So, assistant professor human-robot interaction at the Department of Cognitive Robotics. This event is about drones. We do develop drones, autonomous drones, etc. in our departments. However, me specifically, I am really looking into how to optimize human-robot interaction, right? So how to make technology as comfortable as possible for humans, also how to make the interaction as efficient as possible between the human and the drone or any other sort of robots. How does that actually connect to war and to drones? Well, recently there was this call from our Minister of Defense, and he basically said we have from the Department of Defense, we're going to give 400 million euros to instances, universities, companies in the Netherlands to develop drones, right? Or to adapt current technologies for warfare, for drones for Ukraine, which I think is very nice. I like it, I want to help Ukraine too. But when I, as a scientist, develop a drone, I think I'm not that aware. I cannot speak for everyone, obviously, from the department or from TU Delft, that there is this dual purpose, right? So, and that is basically a point that I want to make. Technology that we develop here, even though it might seem neutral, because we're only developing for the greater good, right? To improve society, as TU Delft's slogan actually is. It is absolutely not. There is this dual use aspect to technology. And I myself, I've also been watching videos of drones. You have drones, so even on YouTube, which is very interesting and right with what you say. So on YouTube you have a very strict policy actually with respect to violence actually. Sorry. But you have a lot of people who are being blown up on YouTube. Whereas if you watch documentaries from the Second World War, a lot of stuff is being blurred out. So that's something interesting also that's going on, right? So apparently this monetization of people being blown up in Ukraine allows for looser policies. Anyway, so you have there this perspective sort of from the drone itself, right? The drone is sort of flying around in search of its target, the first person view you could say, and it finds its target, so there's a human behind it, obviously, human pilot, and human pilot then acquires a target and will fly the drone into it when it's equipped with a warhead or it has a small bomb that's underneath it and will drop on a wounded soldier or whatever. But oftentimes these footages are not that shocking because the video just terminates, right? So that's one perspective. But the second perspective is that you have sort of these observer drones, right, that are on top of the battlefield and that actually show the drones, these first-person view FPV drones they are called, that are going into armored personnel carriers, tanks, wounded soldiers, buildings, blow up, and you might be able to see death and destruction. But the last category, I feel, that is really this, that aligns with this snuff thing that you were talking about, is that drones, that people are just positioning the drones such that you can really see facial expressions and the sort of dying process of the soldier, right? So there are so many perspectives on the matter, right? It almost, and in contrast to other wars, right, or we did not have that many perspectives, it almost looked like we have some sort of a view from nowhere, which is a term coined by the philosopher Thomas Nagel, as far as I know. It's a little bit older already, but I think he popularized it. Like we have all the information that's available, right, in order to make decisions. You could also say it's a view from everywhere. But that does not make the technology neutral in itself, right? Obviously, because there are also people who are selecting this footage, who are putting it on the social media to also push a certain narrative, etc., etc. So as a TU Delft, who are developing drones, new technology, we need to be aware of this dual use of technology. We really need to start thinking about it, having discussions about it, right? I actually had a little video actually that I think is very interesting. It pertains to the latest developments on drone technology in Delft. It was in the news recently. Not specifically on drones that were flown by human operators, but this new development of autonomous drones, right? So that in itself is really something that you order, right? That you push a button and then some sort of AI is going to search on the battlefield and is going to kill someone. So let me just...
Robots are being developed everywhere, but getting robots to work well in the real world is still a big challenge. That's why competitions are so important. They test robots in real, unpredictable situations where there's no time to try again and no way to alter the environment. The robots have to think fast, adapt, and perform at any given time. One challenge where AI was really put to the test this year took place at the 2025 A2RL Autonomous Drone Racing Championship. In this competition, drones had to race at high speed through an indoor track using only a front-facing camera and a motion sensor called an IMU. That means the drone had to see and understand the track in real time, with extremely limited sensors. The drone from TU Delft not only won the main event, flying with peak speeds of 95.8 kilometers per hour through 22 small indoor gates, but it also faced off against 3 of the world's best human drone pilots. And in a historic first, the autonomous drone beat them all. This is more than just a racing win. The smart, lightweight AI that powered the drone could help all kinds of future robots, making them faster, more efficient, and better at handling the real world.
These are from our colleagues from aerospace engineering, actually. But in my opinion, it's not very weird to think that this technology can be employed and we can get these sorts of images from a war zone. So the question really is, that I have not answered myself, how do you go about, right, as a scientist? What kind of norms, what kind of moral do you have? Do you sort of go on with it? So you could, for example, say, sort of given... sorry, now I lost my argument. Anyways, let's just continue. Anyways, so getting back to our Minister of Defense, he actually proposed giving 400 million euros to companies in the Netherlands to really develop drones. Right, you could say, okay, I'm going along with this, my technology that I have developed here. I really, it doesn't matter whether it's employed in a military setting, because Ukraine needs to win, or whatever kind of norm you might have. So personally, I feel that technology that I have been developing at TU Delft, right, it is for the better of society. So in that sense, I feel to transform it into something military, is that the right thing to do? I have my doubts about that. However, you also have, as you see here, a proud Tim van der Hagen, who is collaborating, or the TU Delft itself is collaborating with defense already. These are more programs, right, within which you start developing technology that is really tailored towards defense use. So you have a sort of larger conglomerate that you're thinking within. Maybe that makes things a little bit different. I don't know. I think everyone has to think of him or herself. Anyways, yeah, as a scientist, in these days, with these wars, everything is at the tip of your fingers. You need to be aware of what your technology can do. When I make the interaction between a human and a robot more intuitive, can also be used to kill people easier. So that's what I wanted to say. Hey.
Well, my first question, quite obviously, would be who among you are studying this moment on this kind of technology? I want to share his or her thoughts.
It's very contradicting, obviously. I think we all share the same kind of, paradox of that you want to work on what you like, I mean, I worked on legged robots, for instance. I did my PhD on legged robots. And it's clear that right now the first use of that is military. And I think this is very, very concerning. And as you said, we cannot just see it as just, I'm just doing robotics. I mean, it's becoming more and more apparent that they are being deployed right now. For instance, autonomous drones have been deployed in Libya, completely autonomous drones, back in time with the Taliban. So for me, it's always very, very concerning, but it's also a question of funding. So this picture, I think, it describes a lot what's happening, because you can say, well, I mean, if the military comes and really asks to give you money, then it's clearly not for just doing research. I mean, it has to be deployed in a very specific context. And this way, we can also have a saying of, well, we're doing science, yes, but this is very, very direct. It's very direct at actually killing efficiently. And I think it starts with this, away from doing things on the side, not related to that funding. It's obviously not very clear, I would say, how would we navigate this question as scientists, because in some sense you want the society to be prosperous, you want to protect it, and you also want to have your own scientific curiosity about doing things unconditioned, but at the same time it's becoming more and more apparent that I think it's being deployed in situations like this where it's being efficient and deployed in more war settings. So,
is there a point in which, if you don't have time to of course,
yeah,
but
sure.
would there be a point in which your personal position would change?
I don't think so.
No.
I don't think so. I mean, actually, the first thing, which sounds very easy, I mean, like, it sounds kind of also like evading the problem, would be the first thing that I'm quitting working those stuff.
Yeah.
Because it's I mean,
yeah.
It's very clear. Like,
yeah.
I can't blind my eyes. Yes, I can always resume doing what I'm doing, but it's becoming more and more apparent to me that robotics should have been always an academic problem. It's kind of fun, we're having like, fancy toys to play with and stuff like this, but based on what we're seeing right now, I mean, back in time you have legged robots who walk a couple steps and fall. Right now, it's not.
Yeah.
Right now, also, it's very cheap. You can have a kid that have a robot with 15K and put a machine gun on it. I mean, you see YouTube videos full of those.
Yeah.
So it's not fantasy anymore.
Yeah.
It's very real.
Well, thank you for sharing. I really appreciate it. Who has a question or remark? Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, I just have a question. Because at the beginning of the presentation, you said that, okay, so this whole technological advancement endeavor is neutral, but actually you denied this and then proceeded to show that, well, killing and all this kind of like proved the fact that it's actually, well, I think evil. I think that's your position. But isn't this whole thing neutral or evil or even just insofar as someone or a government uses it? To put it simply or in a simpler manner, let's say a smith who makes a sword, right? The sword is neutral. Why? Because someone can use it for self-defense or not, right? This gets into the whole ethics of self-defense, as you can see. And just because you make a sword sharper or made of steel doesn't make it, good or bad in itself per se. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think the example of the sword may be a little bit misplaced because it's evidently made to kill people. I would like to say to cut people's head off. So technology is neutral. So I think what I wanted to say with that is that there is oftentimes this idea that I think it also pertains a little bit to what you say. We have these nice fancy toys that we can work around, play around with, without any serious implications. For example, me as a human-robot interaction researcher, I want to make autonomous cars more comfortable, more easy to interact with, etc., which in itself is a very good goal, right? But it may also have this side goal of allowing people to kill other people, right? It's inherent, it fits also into that sort of application. And I think as researchers, as people who work in a university, we need to be aware of it, or we need to become aware of it, that our technology has this sort of this multi-leveled sort of application in it. So as a researcher, we are responsible for that awareness, right? Does that answer your question, actually?
Yes, I would say so sufficient.
Fair enough. Okay.
Yes, I have a question about this awareness that you keep talking about, and it's something I hear a lot at the TU Delft, that, you know, also in the social safety and so on. Awareness, great. Awareness seems to be developing, landing, maybe a little slowly, but okay. Say I'm a scientist and I'm now aware.
Yeah. I see your question right already. Yeah. No, that's a very good question, actually. So it indeed also needs to be translated into actions, right? As opposed to only being aware of it. But I think awareness is the first step. Sort of this is the perceptual sort of framework that you have as a scientist that allows you to detect these sorts of dual uses. But then second, for example, the scientist gets this opportunity to apply for grants, right? So there's money involved, and we scientists, we love money, and PhD students and postdocs, etc.
And the deans also.
Absolutely. And we need to get money because the university is on budget cuts, right? So then the question arises, am I going to apply for this grant, yes or no? When I have to, so for example, I'm a drone developer. I know how to make these drones very fast, and I can also make them in swarms. So it's excellent for doing some offensive on the front line. And there is this defense fund. Am I going to apply for it? And it's actually a real world dilemma, because the European Union already said we're going to invest a lot of money into defense. Also, Dutch government is going to invest a lot of money into defense. Is that something, as a scientist, that you want to apply for? And this awareness at least gives you some sort of rationale for yourself whether to do it or not.
There was a question or a remark back there.
Yes.
Yeah, I think I disagree with you. I think the swordsmith is appropriate. Like you say yourself, evidently drones are used in war. So it's like saying, I'm a swordsmith, but my swords should be used for cutting melons, but evidently they're not used for cutting melons. So you have become aware of this. If you're a swordsmith, this is what you do, this is what you're good at, this is what you get paid for. But I guess my question is, like, can you just forever stay in this state of awareness and not decide what to do?
So stop making swords, you would say.
Or, yeah, isn't there a time limit on when you have to decide whether you continue to be a swordsmith or what you want to do about the problem?
Yeah, well, yeah, that would imply some sort of, I would say, a normative framework that somehow informs you when to stop or not. The point is, these technologies also can be used for good. I think many scientists, including myself, want to create technologies that are being used for good purposes, like robot arms, autonomous robots that are able to facilitate caretakers, right, caregivers. I mean, that's excellent, right? And also, and that's something that we want to do more development on. But as a matter of fact, there is also this dual-use purpose. I could also use it to kill a person. If that is indeed becoming sort of the main application of the technology that you are being developing, yeah, then you have to question yourself: is this what I want to do? Maybe not, right? But I think it's a gray area, right? It's also not always as clear as you would like it to have, right? So drones, it's pretty apparent, but you could also argue for cars, right? They also drive into people. I mean, could we apply the same rationale there? Should we stop making cars? I mean, is it too dangerous? I mean, there are all sorts of questions that we can ask now.
If I can add one. Sorry. Yeah. Just like adding on to this, this isn't actually an opinion so much as following the conversation. I read a good article recently from a scholar talking about how in the United States, for example, because they understand that there's this apprehension scientists and engineers have to signing on to certain projects, and that they're much more comfortable signing on to a project or applying for it if it's characterized as fundamental, or basic as opposed to applied research. And so if people want to Google it, her name is Elke Schwartz, and she has an article talking about how the Department of Defense recognizes this and shifts the terms so as to include more cases as basic or fundamental to ease people into it and thereby co-opt the research. So it's simply the grounds for the conversation become even more difficult by virtue of this like kind of arms race between scientists who want a clean conscience and funders who want their research. So
could you spell the name? I think there are some people who want to write it down.
Yeah, Elke Schwartz. So her last name Schwartz, like the German black Schwartz.
Okay.
You can ask me afterwards, and we can send
Yeah,
you
it's interesting that you bring this up because, especially in the United States, I think defense funding, also from my area, is really common, right? So very sort of topics that you may not link to any defense-related stuff. They are related. They are related to defense, and the Navy or the Air Force is investing millions in it, which is fairly interesting. I think at this point in time we're also moving towards that in Europe. At this point,
there were many hands over there. I'm not sure what's first, but I'm going from left to right.
So my argument is that don't you think that it's necessary to do this kind of research? Because, for example, there's let's say nuclear deterrence. You need these kinds of funding and this kind of research to make that competitive advantage. Because, for example, you did not want the war in Ukraine, but you have it. So you need these kind of weapons. Let's say, from a more optimistic perspective, we can say, let's make them more precise, so you have less casualties. You know. So, in my opinion, you will always need this, and it's more important to do this research. Let's say if all scientists in the Netherlands decide not to do it, you lose your competitive advantage. Yeah. So instead of doing a hard thing, you kind of don't want to do it for your own self, compromising the bigger picture.
Yeah, I'm not a pacifist. So I understand your question, and there is indeed also a need to advance military technology in order to be able to defend your country. Obviously, right? Also, Ukraine has the right to do it. The question is whether you, as a scientist, a very friendly scientist, suddenly confronted with this sort of dual use of your technology, is that a fair thing? Especially considering this, the Secretary of Defense of Minister of Defense from the Netherlands, who just says we need to employ these existing technologies and we need to build drones for Ukraine. Obviously, that needs to be done, but it somehow feels wrong. You understand what I mean? Yeah. If you are within a consortium, for example, explicitly aimed at developing military technology, I feel that's a bit different because you have at least made a conscious decision to get in there, right? Whereas for the other fact, your stuff is just being used, and it was not your choice in the first place. Maybe afterwards you're fine with it, fair enough, but other people may not be.
I think earlier you mentioned something about your main goal being making robots easier to use, but then the side goal of that would then also be to killing people. And I think that's kind of a dangerous narrative to make because, I mean, the example that you gave, the drone racing, I think is probably the most neutral application of drones. And saying that their side goal would be to optimize weapons is a stretch. Because I can assume that their goal was not to kill anyone or anything related to that during that competition, and pushing these boundaries and pushing those limits. Yes, it aligns with the applications of military things, but in itself, it's something that it's a great achievement in the sense that it's pushing the boundaries of technology, and I think it's really just because it aligns doesn't mean that the goal of these people or anything to do with that is necessarily a side goal. It's mainly comes in when you're optimizing for these purposes, and I think it's a dangerous link to make if it's not really directly for that that you're developing that.
Well, agreed. right. I mean, obviously these people don't want to kill.
No, but you know what I mean.
But absolutely. But so that's so. We as scientists, we oftentimes have a little bit, I feel, of a sort of a narrow worldview, whereas we think our technology is going to make this world better, but this world is broader than technology alone, right? And technological development alone. The question here is, do we as scientists also need to include the awareness of the fact that this technology can be dual use in our decisions, right? So obviously I don't want to kill, but there is this this broader world in which people are going to use it to kill. So I don't say you shouldn't do the progress or the research, but at least it should be at the back of our minds, right? Because it is going to be used. And this is a sort of a paradoxical situation, where on the one hand you have people who are doing good, and on the other hand people who are trying to do bad things. And yeah, you as a scientist have to navigate sort of between these two sort of ends. So no, obviously the people don't want to kill, but there is absolutely a world in which we also live as scientists, of which we are part of, that will use it for other purposes than I intended it. And the question, yes, is what do I have to do with that? That's, I think, I'll leave it at that.
If I can just build on or offer some comments coming from a philosopher whose work, if could be put to military use, congratulations, because I see it's pretty useless. But from the outside, some conversations that philosophers and political philosophers and ethicists have about these questions are to say a lot of these concerns are really at the individual level. And sometimes when we frame the anxieties of competition, it's, oh, say the Netherlands or the EU versus Russia or something. But then what is this anxiety about your work ending up in service of these things? I think a lot of it is the associations we have with institutions. Like if someone says Raytheon, Lockheed Martin, there's a certain weight to it because of the effects that they have on institutions, whether academic or political. So one thing to think about, which some political philosophers and ethicists do, is, okay, how should you shape the profession of being a scientist or an engineer so as to preserve your rights at the institutional level if you want to say no to something in the future? Namely, if we have conscientious objection for soldiers, can you have conscientious objection for scientists? If you have legal protections, professional protections, and if you want to ensure whistleblowers within military institutions, what about whistleblowers within scientific and academic institutions? And questions like this. I know much less about the European context, but in the American context, I would see that as valuable right now, very much so. So part of the conversation is maybe thinking about what sort of profession as such do you want it to be in the face of this conflict institutionally between power? Because I think a lot of the anxiety, if I can read the room a little bit, is the corrupting, co-opting force that sometimes, say, the military-industrial complex has. In my country, I see it, at least. Again, I can't speak for a place that I'm only beginning to get to know, but I think there's some fruitful progress there.
Well, I could imagine that, especially with drones, my conscience really is torn apart because it's a dual use. So how can you ever find some kind of moral framework to develop here? Is there a possibility? Well, questions you can ask yourself.
I think the trouble is whether it's cowardice or epistemic humility. Let's see what I'm doing right now.
It's one of the two.
I would say, yeah, I think it's cowardice. Anyway, I would say one important thing is to create the conditions such that if something's going wrong, that the people who want to either point it out or throw a stick in the spokes of that machine can do so with full protection and in solidarity, etc. So yeah, I think scientific engineering, conscientious objection, whistleblowing protections, etc. And then also thinking really seriously, what sort of thing do you at least want a university to be? If someone commits to working at, say, the Royal Military Academy as a researcher, that's one thing. But as a military ethicist, it's really worth considering right now what makes something a legitimate target in the case of a war. A lot of people at this university are doing military research, and a war breaks out, TU Delft becomes a different type of place. Right? there's a possible world, a possible universe in which no military research is being conducted at TU Delft. In which case, if you cross your fingers and your enemy is following the laws of war, they cannot target you. But if all of a sudden we have a whole bunch of FPV drones with 3D printed grenade dropping attachments being produced in design faculty or something, what sort of university are you? What sort of thing do you belong to? You become potentially a legitimate target, or you become complicit in other things. A huge feature of the conversation about Israel right now is the universities which host military training programs. What kind of institution is that anymore? The hybridization of an institution. So at the level of the individual, I can offer no insight, again, out of cowardice or humility, but at the institutional level, I feel myself beginning to feel more strongly about the importance of separation. But this is me really shooting from the hip and offering some hot takes.
Some people would say we're already in a kind of hybrid war, you know, so it makes it more difficult, I guess.
I think it makes it more dangerous. If I want to keep my university safe, I would want to have less entanglement. This is Nick speaking.
Okay, fair enough. You're Nick. There was a hand back there. Yeah, go ahead.
I want to come back to Nick's conversation.
Sure.
The presentation again.
Yeah.
You mentioned about how we all have different experiences with how we use technology. For example, like when I was seeing the drone race, I was more terrified watching it as compared to, let's say, the drone racer, for example. He was ecstatic seeing that his drone was the fastest.
Yeah.
For me, I saw, instead of maybe those structures, I saw buildings that the drone would be flying through. And that was a lot more terrifying to me because I know that the drone is not going to be used for races, it's going to be used to go through buildings. And since it's autonomous, I think it's even worse because, as Nick mentioned as well, there's a level of desensitization. And now it's not even a drone pilot that's flying it, it's an autonomous, probably trained on AI, I'm not sure, to detect how it can take an optimal path. We've already seen how AI is used in Gaza as well to target civilians and how different companies are facilitating the use of AI technology for that as well.
Yeah.
So I'm really more concerned about how AI is going to, again, distance us as an individual or as a drone operator or as a scientist from the war even further. Like, wars are taking place across screens now, and now it's going to be worse because you're not even controlling the drone. So I think that it's going to be even more desensitizing. But a question I had was whether you as a scientist would feel a lot better with this dilemma if you had control over your own technology, because I feel like right now there's a dependence between educational institutions and the state for funding, for example, where you have to do certain types of research if you want to get funding. And so would you be more comfortable if you could dictate the terms in which your technology is used? So sort of decouple, at least to some degree, that dependence with the state or the military industrial complex.
Well, perhaps it's also interesting to first start with the first thing you said about the distance between autonomous drones between us and the drones themselves. Perhaps you could start there.
I mean, in very brief, I think one of the common ways of phrasing it is that distance, whether physical or mediated by user interface, lowers the threshold for use of force. I think that's one very common way of putting it. Or if you reduce the number of people who need to consent or decide to enthusiastically even participate in an operation, you can separate the decision to execute the use of force further from the point at which it occurs. Namely, you shift it. Something which would otherwise be maybe a tactical decision can then become an operational, strategic, or political decision. Automation shifts the location at which decisions need to take place, which can then reduce resistance organizationally. That's a common way of phrasing the risk or the risks.
Another second part, should we as scientists be more, what was the example?
You would have more ownership of how the technology is used.
Yeah.
Well, that is a good question. I feel that the current progress in science, especially in the last 100 years, was also due to globalization, right? The fact that everyone is able to build upon the steps that we've made. So if we want to continue within this space, right, in improving this world and make it a better place to live in, I don't think that sort of constraining the application of your technology will contribute towards that. I feel that because then, if it's only constrained to a certain application area, what is it worth, right? So to a certain extent, I would argue we need to go, we need to develop in the current pace, but I feel the first step here would be for scientists, especially in these days with these wars, to get this awareness of that their technology can be used as such, and to start a discussion amongst peers on how to go about. I think it's not a clear-cut answer there, but I feel just constraining the application of your technology is also not the way to go, in my opinion, because it hampers development. So I think it all starts with thinking and discussing, and then based on that, trying to sort of generate a normative framework in which you can make decisions, either as an institution or as an individual.
As a last thing before we go to eat pizza and discuss further, of course, the whole gender thing still bothers me, Nick. So many more men watch those kind of snuff movies than snuff footage than women. What does it say about perhaps I'm too moralistic here, but what does it say about our upbringing, about our education?
Well, I mean, it's rough. No matter how you slice it. I come from the American context where the relation between gender and violence is even more frightening. I come from like a very kind of cowboy family in the United States. I was given a gun when I was 9 years old, pardon me, which is the most American sentence I've said in a while. And my sister wasn't, right? So that's like part of it. And the types of games that are marketed and so on. So the other features of the research about who are the sorts of people who seek out violent footage to consume recreationally, namely things like ISIS beheading videos or combat footage, like those Reddit forums, etc. It's typically unemployed men, even more specifically. And in the kind of classic age range, I think of something like 18 to 34, which is that kind of classic demographic bracket people are put in. And it's also that age which is worried about with radicalization and so on. So I think deeper questions about gender ideology, radicalization and recreation, and how those two relate, is a field of research that I simply don't have footing in to say much further about. But it's a direction in which those psychologists, sociologists are going, namely asking what I think needs to be very frankly asked is, what's wrong with young men? And why is this footage being recreationally consumed, often leading to their, in some cases, radicalization and then participation? I mean, another example of, it's so dark that even without the footage it's hard to reference, but the Christchurch shooting, GoPro, very first person view, was produced with precisely that demographic in mind. So it was really performative violence to be consumed by an audience he knew would like to consume it. And I think that's a sort of a par excellence example of this type of violence, which changes in its character by virtue of the fact that you know someone's watching. And so long as there are these audiences, it will continue to have this effect, which I think is deeply morally troubling. Not to make like a moral panic about it, but at least to be a little bit concerned. I mean, someone might say, well, we used to have gladiators, or people used to go and watch. If you've read War and Peace, I think it opens with people watching some battle between Napoleon and the Russian forces. So the spectation as an activity has happened. The first battles in the Civil War were also like literally spectated by people just standing far enough away to watch it with their own eyes. But the persistence of spectacle making of violence doesn't change, I think, the importance of its treatment as somehow symptomatic of things not being perhaps as they should be. This is again me speaking very normatively. But
sorry to interrupt, but you also mentioned in your talk about this footage being a business model, right? For all this, for the good cause, you could say. How does that?
I think
it's a really
normatively. Maybe I'll get there by the end of the sentence, but when you look at social media pages of Ukrainian and Russian units, some of the most successful GoFundMe type fundraisers are for drone teams, because the drone teams can have a big social media presence, because they can put up lots of compelling content, which has lots of viewers. And then they say, well, we need to buy a new DJI Mavic, or we need to buy a new FPV drone. It costs $3,000 or euros or whatever. If you help us buy that, then we'll put your name on it, or we'll create footage then sort of for you. So yeah, it's a really kind of pay-per-view phenomenon, or you feel this participation, this parasocial relationship. Often these drone pilots have really large followings. These are people who then have a little bit of celebrity, personality. Their names, or at least their call signs, are known. They will put the drone next to a cat and take photos. Again, it's not that this is totally, radically novel, as if we're in a new era. I don't like this periodization so much. But it's ethically questioning that, yeah, your consumption of it then changes what violence occurs. Because there's other people who potentially need money. The types of things which get lots of money in Ukraine, from what I've been reading, is a huge amount goes to, like, yeah, drone units from, like, popular fundraising, and people who save animals. So if you can post pictures of cats and dogs that you've rescued from Kherson after the dam breaks, a lot of funding comes through. But then I have friends who are on ambulance teams, and what can you post from an ambulance team? Not cats and dogs, not Russians dying. You can show people suffering without some progress being made in this quote-unquote cause of the war or blah, blah, blah. It's much less sexy from a spectacle perspective, and it gets less funding. And so, yeah, I've had friends on all types of these different teams. They have very different fundraising experiences.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much. I think we can discuss more with...
One last question, okay. Then we can discuss still more. Well,
sorry, I came late. But you say that because like that people fund these drone teams because they like to see people dying.
Yeah.
I find it a bit weird because I personally donated to a drone team, and it's not that I like them to see being blown up.
Yeah.
But there are a lot of people that actually deeply care about what's happening, and they understand how important drones are. If it wasn't for the drones, Ukraine would have already be fallen. So it's not necessarily because they like to see them blow up, but it's because they have to.
I mean, I'm motivated from a similar place. My presentation started, some of my research direction is because I have a very good friend who's a drone pilot in Ukraine right now. My position is not that we should cut funding or that people shouldn't be supported. And it is, yeah, per dollar spent, probably very high return on investment. But because my friends who are on those types of teams are able to put out that type of footage, they get a different type of attention, they get different types of funding than my friends who are just on ambulance teams. And so it's a commentary on the type of spectacle and what it does to funding, frankly. And I think similar things happen with medical research, differences in if we were to be, I don't know, effective altruists about it and just measure things in purely ROI terms for funding, it might look quite different. And so my reflection is more about the people who do enjoy it. I would probably send my buddy money if he needed it. Luckily, other people are, so he's doing okay. But I don't watch the videos that he makes. Perhaps similar to you in that sense.
It's interesting that these sorts of videos need to be shared in order to gain that because they, I think, gather a lot of money, right? Mm-hmm. Just because of this snuff factor that they have, death, suffering, we're all weirdly sort of drawn to it, right? Like, I think a lot of people, or not everyone, obviously not, but it does well, I guess. And that's precisely the reason that it's out there.
And for me, that's, I think, what's interesting is understanding what it's like for people to have different relationships to this media. There was a really weird YouTube video I saw yesterday from a content creator, and it was imagining a scenario in which a partner, two people who are dating, one wakes up to see that their romantic partner is watching footage, in this case not combat footage, but like of someone catching animals. And it's like they go down a YouTube rabbit hole, but it's a violent YouTube rabbit hole. And how do you relate to people who are in very different media spaces in relation to war? And I think if we want to characterize, quote unquote, what's going on rather than saying, oh, this is how everyone experiences it, it's precisely the space of that difference that's interesting and how we relate to each other across that difference. What's it like to wake up and find your friend watching combat footage recreationally?
Okay, very, very, very last question for Noted Pizza.
So maybe a bit disconnected, but what do you think about first-person shooter video games and their relation, especially now, to FPV drones? Because, like, on the side, it seems like there are a lot of parallels, especially in the terms of normalization of violence and desensitization.
To my understanding, I probably have very boomer instincts about it. Despite having been someone that used to play like shoot 'em up games when I was younger, I think my instincts are very boomer, thinking like, it's very dangerous to play those games, it desensitizes dignity, etc. Evidently, the research is quite conclusive, so far as I know, that playing violent video games does not promote aggressiveness or violent behavior. That being said, I still think it's valuable to reflect on what values are encoded into the design of the things we do recreationally. And it's a deeper conversation, I suppose, because at least when someone plays that game, they can say, well, I take ironic detachment from it. My brother-in-law plays Grand Theft Auto, for example, and he's always like, well, it's made purposefully like ironic and absurd, and he can point to features of design which are supposed to be sort of a meta-commentary on American culture, and it can be this whole thing, which he can then be looking at the artifice of the product itself, the design choices, as a kind of work of art, etc. So I don't know if I can stand up to that counter-argument, but then it's precisely that combat footage doesn't have those things that makes it a different thing to consume recreationally. And again, this isn't a total condemnation of watching this sort of stuff. I think, like I try to emphasize, it's happened across history. And secondly, if we never see what war is like, that's probably a great risk too. It's about under what conditions do we, should we, how and with whom, etc.
Okay, well, let's eat pizza and still talk. But before we go to eat pizza, first I want to show you the rest of this program, because it's part of our War on Entropy program, and I think I have to use... Is it over there? Oh, yeah. So, I want to invite you all, especially for next week, when we're going to talk more about military ethics, ethics of military and technology. So we already had part of the discussion here. I think there's much more to talk about. So I really want to invite you next week for this event. And then on May 26th, also very interesting, is the anti-debate, and that's that really is an experiment. It's something that takes 2-3 hours, in which we're going to explore a method in which we can talk to each other, not only rationally, but also with our heart and our emotions, and to see if we can, how we can talk to each other in an open way. It's a very special method, and you really are invited for this one. And then in the evening, the same day, is our critical mass session. It's in Delft at the theater there, and there we go. Critical mass is always about interaction, etc. And we're going to do something with the anti-debate also in this critical mass session. And then the last is on May 27. New World Order and TU Delft. Sounds a bit Star Wars, New World Order, but it's actually is Rob de Wijk, a famous Dutch historian, geopolitical scientist, who's going to talk about let's say the entropy of our current order and how we can navigate in it as a University of Technology. So with all this being said, there are the pizzas. So you're all welcome to eat something. Thank you very much for coming, for sharing your questions and your insights. And thank you, Nick and Ike, for sharing your beautiful presentations. Thank you all.